Hi, and welcome to another episode here on the channel. Today we're gonna analyze the national debt of Japan, and I find it very fascinating that Japan can have such a huge debt to GDP ratio, about 263%, rising annually, while we are talking about crisis in countries who have about 100%. I want to understand how it's possible for Japan to serve their debt, and I also want to use this opportunity for everyone here to learn more about um, macroeconomics and why some politicians are telling you that it's okay to print more money, it's okay to rise the debt levels of your specific country. Because in a way, Japan serves as an example of why you don't have to pay your debt back, because let's keep rising it and it will sort itself out because Japan is doing quite fine. And that's what we are being told, obviously. And we can see that some politicians are saying that we should invest more. We should, for example, in Europe, increase the spending on military equipments, etc. So it's a lot of spending. Politicians are not talking about raising taxes. It's about promising a lot of things, cut taxes, but also increase spending in military equipment, etc., etc. So for me, who is interested in analyze the economics of it, I feel like we are in a position now in the world as a whole where politicians are trying to solve a lot of problems with just promise everything and are not taking into account like the debt to GDP ratios of countries. And GDP is the gross domestic product. So that is like how much a country's economic transactions sum for a year is, basically, you can say, to make it easy. And it's a bit alarming when the debt is more than the GDP for a whole year, so 100%. So 263% is quite extreme. So we need to really understand for our own sake how Japan are managing the situation, and if uh, the way Japan is doing it is applicable to other nations also. And if it is not, then we should alarm bells should be ringing, and you should maybe question your positions, etc. So quite an important subject. That is why I'm bringing it up today. So first, I'm gonna dive right in here at Wikipedia just to provide you with some of the most talked about points, and also we will use ChatGPT to dive deeper into this certain subject. So here we can see that the debt is about 8.84 trillion US dollars, and they have yen in Japan, so that's like 1.35 quadrillion yen, and that's 263% of the GDP of Japan. So it's the highest among developed nations, this debt. So it's extreme, and we can say that 43.3% of it is held by the Bank of Japan. So that's very something that we will come back to. And here they talk about what led to the high debt. They had an asset price bubble collapse in 1991, and they have responded to this by continuing to raise the debt levels, and they are trying to spur growth by some quantitative easing. The QE, maybe you heard a lot about it during the COVID, when we're trying to get the economy running despite everything being shut down. So basically, you are printing more money just to push that growth. Having more money out in the system will basically lead to uh, more growth for different companies, etc. But obviously, that's printed money will drive, for example, inflation, etc. So it's not like you can just print money magical and not uh, expect any backlash in some sense. So yeah. Anyway, that's what they have done, and they have increased the debt, issued more bonds, etc. And yeah, here they are talking about some of the crises they have had. They talked about earlier the price bubble collapse, and here we had the 2008 bank recession, and obviously we had some earthquakes, tsunamis, and nuclear disasters. If you remember, back in 2011, and obviously the COVID-19 pandemic has was problematic for many countries, especially the countries that was more like um, had stronger policies of not going out, etc. Uh, so yeah, that's about some of the things that have really driven the debt levels, but also politicians that has basically said it's okay, we can manage this level of debt. We have that kind of control in Japan. Obviously, if you have this insane amount of debt, you have to push down the rates, and you have to believe long term that the debt can be served, issuing more bonds, and artificially like pushing down the interest rates. Because if you don't push it down, um, it will be very expensive to serve at debt levels. Um, Here we see some they're trying to like raise some consumption taxes a little bit to um, pay back some of the deficit. It was like decided 2012 but implemented 2019, which tells you that it's quite hard to change these type of policies in Japan and still be popular, meaning they have rather printed a lot of money to make the people happy than maybe take some harsh decisions to keep the debt levels low. Um, so yeah. Anyway, I'm done with the Wikipedia, and I will just also try here in ChatGPT. How does Japan manage their enormous debt level to GDP or something like that? So exceeding 250%. So how is it possible? And is it applicable to other countries to do it like this? So partly Japan are the debt is held by domestic investors, including Japanese banks. This is makes it easier for them to control that type of debt in comparison with a lot of Western economies. For example, the USA have a very globalized economy and are affected much more by other countries, and they can't artificially push down interest rates as Japan can, because Japan's debt is so domestic. Here you can see over 90% of Japan's public debt is owned by domestic entities, meaning they're less vulnerable. And obviously, this makes the low interest rates possible. They have ultra low interest rates, and that is how they can serve the enormous debt. Because interest rates, if you don't know how interest rate works, is basically if you have $1,000 in debt and the interest rate is 10%, then you will pay 1,000 and multiply it with 10%, so $100 extra every year on that debt. So basically, if you can push that interest rate down, you will have a lot less money going back to, for example, banks who are that state, because obviously the state are loaning the money from somewhere, so they have to pay the debt, and most commonly is to banks. Um, so here they are saving government funds, money, etc., by keeping the interest rates very low. We can also see that the Bank of Japan engages in quantitative easing policy, where it buys government bonds to keep long-term interest rates low and support economic activity. As a result, they are like pushing down the borrowing cost, but in a way over time increasing the debt levels. So they are kind of doing an experiment, I would say, here in Japan, and has done since the 1990s. And obviously, at the moment, it works because they have so low interest rates. They also have very large domestic saving rates. The culture in Japan are helping to keep this system going because if you save a lot of money, that money can be used as cash for the banks, for example. Um, it's very, as you see, a cultural characteristic with households and pension funds accumulating substantial financial assets. So that is also helping with this to providing or making it possible to have this situation where they artificially push down interest rates. We also have inflation targeting from the banks, and the target is around 2%. But I would say um, that is like the same in many countries around the world. And if you have inflation, obviously in the future, it will be easier to pay down debt because the money supply inflates. But also, if you have inflation, there are risks that the inflation are driven by what we said before, QE, quantitative easing. So it depends on what drives the inflation. But if you have the same debt levels, but you have inflation, then the debt will be like cheaper because the debt will be worth less in the future. So that's what the kind of making an inflation spiral because you don't want to pay your debt because in the future the debt will be worth less because you have inflation, then you want inflation, and then you think you can spend more, and then the expectation will be that inflation will be going on and on and on, making it like a spiral of inflation, and that will in turn makes it harder for the public, in this case Japan, to provide services to a good price. It would be harder and more expensive for them to, for example, have nuclear plants, provide basic hospital services, etc. So it's not that easy just to drive the inflation up to serve the debt. It's not sustainable long term, so to speak. Also, what could be complicated is they have an aging population, which will make it hard to maybe serve the debt. Um, Also, this is maybe ChatGPT are bringing this up because it shows maybe why the debt levels are slowly continuing to rise. It's very hard with an aging population to pay off the debt and also serve like the services that are required for an aging population. Um, they are saying that the Japanese government and central banks often manage the yen's exchange rates through monetary policy tools, keeping it weak so they can export more, driving economic growth. So that is also one of the strategies. But do they have done this for many, many, many years? And now the debt levels are 260%. So I wouldn't say it's very sustainable, even though you can do it is, at the moment, for example, USA are talking about they want to do this and make the dollar more cheap so they can make it more attractive to coming to USA and buy products. But if all countries are thinking like this, we will just maybe drive inflation, and that's like the, what can I say, the nationalistic approach is problematic. So could be problematic if everyone did it. So we should keep that in mind. The confidence in Japan's creditworthiness has to be on point, very high, if they are to have the interest rates low. So they are having that belief. Maybe that belief is very high in Japan in comparison with other countries, making it easier for them to have this type of extreme policies. Um, Stable political system. So it's hard to guarantee that you have a stable political system in every country, making it hard to have these kind of extreme policies. They have undertaken some structural reforms to improve productivity, in specific sectors like technology and manufacturing, um, that spur economic growth, obviously. So they hope that this could help reduce the debt to GDP ratio over time. It hasn't really done that yet because they always want to do something more with the money that the growth spur. The inflation, obviously, is in there in the background, even though Japan actually has had some deflation also back in the days. But it's not like you can just invest your way out of um, this type of debt. If it was that easy, everyone could do it and wouldn't have that debt. So yeah, Japanese government bond, G JGB market is one of the largest and most liquid in the world, which it makes it very easy for the government to issue debt at low cost, even with high outstanding balance. So they can borrow more and more and more and more to a very cheap price with very low interest rates, which kind of is a double-edged sword because you can pay that um, rising service cost, etc. But in the end of the day, that also spur and drives more debt. Uh, Here we have also they don't have a lot of external borrowing, so that makes it easier for them to afford to roll over its debts. So they have that control. I was telling you earlier about that if, for example, the United States, that they have a lot of international financial market connections, meaning it can't really afford to roll over its debt that easily. So risk and challenges here. We have addressed already some of the challenges, but here are some um, demographic challenges. Obviously, an aging population makes it very hard to pay off the debts. Deflationary pressures. Despite aggressive monetary policies, Japan has struggled with deflation, which reduces the effectiveness of debt management strategies. So I actually want to ask here, why inflationary pressure? Why do they have that? That's very interesting. But first, I want to have that lately. Global economic conditions. Obviously, with the global economic slowdown, they export a lot of products, and also they are like an island, so they are still very connected to economic slowdowns globally. Making, for example, they sell Toyotas, etc., a lot of uh, important products. Uh, and if we have a downturn, that could harm their ability to serve the debts. Um, why do they have a deflationary pressure then? Um, what spurs that? Is a decreased consumer demand because of aging population? So that will make actually the debt cost go up over time, because the debt will be worth more in the future instead of less, as we are used to in Western economies. And obviously, the shrinking workforce is an indirect effect of the Asian population, also driving these deflationary problems. Also, low economic growth is part of this. Also, we have the lost decade of the 90s in Japan, almost 2 decades, a lot of stagnation and deflationary pressures, and also some weak outlooks. This makes it very hard for businesses to raise prices because there are not enough consumer demands, not many young people are out there, etc. Uh, they have some falling wages and employment insecurity, and obviously that is a part of this deflationary spiral, because if you can't sell products, you don't have enough money to provide high salaries, and you maybe have to end the contracts of your workers because you can't sell, and then it's a spiral. So that also makes the pressure, deflationary pressures. And also this also, for example, we have talked about the inflation and the expectations that drives inflation. Probably a lot of you are more like well versed in that type of situation after COVID-19 and all the printing that has been going on in the West, but the expectation can be on the other way also. So if you expect a lot of deflation, it will probably spur more deflation. So to counteract the aging population, probably Japan have a lot of stimulants, a lot of economic activity from the government just to spur that economic growth and artificially try to drive the GDP forward. But that also makes the debt levels rise. So they have not that organic growth in Japan. So it's just artificial. And that has also driven the debt levels to higher levels. Um, so yeah, here we have a lot of like the currency risk, the monetary policies, global economic environment, etc. What is the interest rates in Japan versus USA? Just so we have some numbers to compare here. So it's quite a big difference. So if you have a huge debt of they have in Japan, but they just have 0.5% in interest rates, but the Federal Reserves have like 4.5%. That's like almost that's 9x the cost of borrowing money. So despite the debt levels being twice as big in percent of GDP in Japan, the cost for the United States to serve their debt is then 9x, and we split that in two, so 4.5 bigger. So this is why the debt level in the United States, for example, but also in some European countries, are more alarming and are eating a lot more of the welfare state, the services, etc. That is why you're hearing about the panic cuts, etc., going on in some of the services that government provides. So this is why Japan can serve their debt. They can artificially push down their interest rates to 0.5%. They have some unique situations going on with the culture, with the demographics, aging population, with the historic economic situation in the country, where it is geographically in the world, etc., that has firstly made the debt rise, but also made it possible to serve that debt level. While in Western societies, it is as it is now, with the economic intertwined like it is, it's impossible to have that kind of debt level with as Japan has without an actual collapse. So that is what I want you to understand when maybe some YouTubers, politicians, think tanks are saying, "Oh, we can just borrow more; it's no problem." The debt level. Look at Japan; they have such a high debt to GDP ratio. We can also have that. It's just bullshit that we have to keep it the economic tight and predictable. You should be you when you hear that, your alarm bells should ring, and you should really focus, because if the government just print a lot of money to keep the election promises fulfilled, in the end of the day that will drive inflation, and that will take your money, but the money will be lost from high inflation instead, with the money being worth less every year. So that was my focus of today, and I hope you have learned something. Thanks for everything.